Carson Troutman, thank you for being on the podcast, sir. I appreciate it.
No problem.
So we went to the same high school, but you have a pretty unique story, and I just wanted to give you a platform here to kind of talk about it and everything. But I think for one, though, it's a pretty unique situation to kind of go through what you went through growing up, but then to somehow come back into a situation where you're definitely trying to benefit others. I just think it's unique. But I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience and everything, and you can go ahead and tell a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So as Drew mentioned here, I went to Cal, got kicked out of Cal, and then now I teach at Cal. So it's a bit of a unique situation.
And you teach Bible, no less.
Yeah, I teach Bible. So I went there. I got kicked out. I tried to get back in. I got kicked out my junior year. Tried to get back in my senior year. They wouldn't let me back in, but now they let me teach there. So it's a weird situation.
Now, looking at it now, it's definitely weird to think about, you getting expelled for this, but you got kicked out of Cal for smoking weed, which is now approached differently nowadays.
Well, not just smoking weed, but the cultivation of marijuana.
You grew it too.
Yeah.
And by a stroke of luck too, what was it that you almost got in a lot more trouble than you did?
Yeah, so one of the big things that turned out well for us was we were all under 18, all of us that ended up getting arrested. So we were juniors. Most of us had just turned 17. So it'd been a year later, we'd be in more trouble. But even if you're under 18, you can still catch a felony. We didn't look into this at all because we were kind of screwing around and we weren't professional,
Well, what 17-year-old is looking into the
right
legalities of...
I had a friend that basically looked up how to grow weed on Google, and then we started it at his house, and we took it out into the woods, and we found out later that 5 plants is a felony in the state of Kentucky. We grew exactly 5 initially. Jeez. The day before we ended up getting arrested, one of them died, and we had pulled it out, got rid of it or whatever. It was gone. And so we ended up getting a misdemeanor, which led to not that much legal trouble. So the school found out, we got kicked out of the school, but we had to go to court, and we had community service and some counseling sessions we had to go to. But besides that, not a lot of legal issues, and we got to get it expunged off our record. So if I apply for a job or a school or whatever, I can say that I don't have any outstanding charges or anything like that.
Do you feel differently about your situation now with the way that we're looking at marijuana these days? There are businessmen now who are growing hemp for CBD oil and products like that, and now it's becoming this medically beneficial phenomenon where people are starting to praise it now. Do you feel differently now?
Yeah, it's a really complicated issue. Kind of what I was taught growing up is that weed just as a blanket thing is totally wrong, and it's just like alcohol, in the same way you shouldn't get drunk. Certainly as an underage, teenager, you also shouldn't get high, but marijuana is not exactly like alcohol, even the experience of using it, but also the different ways you can use it. So now, even within Kentucky, hemp and CBD oil being legal, that's not stuff that's connected to getting high. It's more of a...
It's like THC is the chemical compound.
Yeah, it's absent of THC. They are working on in Kentucky, and they passed it obviously in other areas of the country, medical marijuana, where you could use it as pain relief, or cancer patients that are going through chemo can use it to get their appetite back. And I think that there can be some good uses for it. But in my position, I wasn't thinking about all that. I was just trying to get high, and was way into that to an unhealthy level, as far as just escaping from reality. And it really removed me from my family, obviously removed me from any type of faith in God, and consumed my life in a very unhealthy way.
So it was almost as if the product itself wasn't the thing that was really wrong in the situation, but it was more so what you were trying to do that was wrong. You were looking for a rebellious outlet almost.
Yeah, I don't think that I think weed could be used in some good ways, but I was certainly not using it that way at all.
So it was the mentality behind it that really kind of put you on that path. But then, you know, after the fact, you get kicked out of Cal. Where'd you go to high school after that?
I went to Collins in Shelby County. It was actually the first year it opened up. So
okay, yeah. But now you went on a path after that to return to Cal to be a spiritual leader.
Yeah. So what happened from there? Even before I went to Collins my senior year, we got kicked out the end of junior year of high school. We had about a month left. And so in some ways, Cal was gracious to us, although they kicked us out. It was so close to the end of the school year that they let us finish up school through home. So we would take home assignments, go in and take our finals and stuff like that.
Okay.
And one of the biggest parts of my testimony actually came from a Bible class, which is I'm actually teaching the class that I was taking.
What's the specific Bible class you're teaching?
It was an apologetics class. We have a worldview apologetics class that I get to teach sometimes at the school. Nice. But it was a pretty simple assignment. We had to watch a video by this guy named Lee Strobel, who's very well known in mainstream Christian culture. But he was an atheist journalist in Chicago. His wife started getting into the Christian faith, going to church, and he went with her and basically started going and took it upon himself to just show how ridiculous it was. And so he's a journalist, and so he started researching, interviewing all these people. And to make a long story short, he eventually, instead of showing that the faith didn't make any sense, he became a Christian. And so we were watching his testimony, and then he interviewed this guy who's not really talked about a lot, but his name is Charles Templeton. And he used to do ministry with Billy Graham. In fact, he was kind of the Billy Graham before Billy Graham.
Oh, they were like partners.
Yeah, they went on like the crusades together, spoke to large audiences. But in the midst of his ministry, and this, is kind of another topic, but people can get caught up when you're in ministry, ministering to all these different people, not ministering to yourself, and becoming kind of hardened in your own faith. He basically decided that he didn't believe anymore, and what I think was an honest and the right thing for him to do. He's like, I don't believe this anymore, so I'm not going to do this ministry. He didn't want to be fake, and so I respect that. But he was kind of talking about some of the specific doubts that he had, just questions that he couldn't find good answers to that caused him to walk away. And so in the video that we had to watch for the class, they were talking through those questions, talking with him. Then they went to different scholars or professors who were giving answers. And they gave good answers, and I don't remember the exact answers they gave, but it really laid an impression on me. And what it did, hearing the video and then the combination of my life was kind of shut down, when you get kicked out of school, and I have strict parents, and I'm not able to hang out with my friend. I was all into smoking weed. That's all I cared about. Wasn't doing that anymore. I had to really evaluate, what am I doing with my life? And so through that video, I began to evaluate, like, man, do I really think that the Christian faith is true? Because if it is true, then I got to do something about it, right? I have to follow it fully instead of just kind of sitting in the middle like a lot of the crowd at Cal will do, or just in cultural Christianity. But if it's not true, then we just need to reject it. And so I really came to just a key moment in my life at that point, and I decided that based on the evidence that I had and my experiences, and I think definitely the Lord was reaching out to me, that I did believe it was true, and so I was going to follow it full-heartedly. So I had that experience about a month after I got kicked out, and it was kind of a battle at first, but really miraculously, the Lord took me from being a pothead to having no desire to smoke weed again. A couple of my friends that had gotten arrested with me, they got right back into it a few months later. And so from there, I went to high school and started thinking about what I wanted to do with my life, and really felt and had other people affirm a call to ministry. And so I ended up going to Boyce Bible College in town and doing a program there with Southern Seminary as well, getting my degrees, and then started working at a church, and then was looking for and got the opportunity to teach at Cal as a outlet of ministry.
What did you study at Southern?
I started on this worldview, like apologetics tracks. From that video, I kind of had a passion for worldview and apologetics. My degrees basically ended up being the most general degrees you could get, but it allowed me to have a lot of electives, and most of those I focused on world religions and worldview, apologetics, kind of defending the faith, answering tough questions, because that's something I had a heart for just from experiences that I had. And I had some encounters with Mormons when I was in college, and so started really looking into other religions and cults and how to engage them. So that was a focus.
Cool. Do you think that because of those events in your life, like getting kicked out of Cal, getting put into that, that hole in a sense, was the thing that helped bring out like that desire in you? Or do you think with or without that, you kind of would have ended up here anyway?
Well, I've always kind of had the desire to look into things and to think through things. A lot of the surface level positivity Christianity that you get, and you get a lot of that at Cal.
Right.
That did not resonate very well with me. I was kind of opposed to that. So I had a lot of friends that they viewed their faith as basically just, well, I look to God for help when I'm in trouble, or if I want to do well in sports or get a job or whatever, stuff like that.
Are you trying to break that status quo at Cal?
Yeah, that's a big... You have just a ton of people. You have some people at Cal that are very openly, like, deep into their faith, trying to live out the gospel. And then you have some people that are being honest and outspoken about not caring at all. Yeah. But most people kind of fall in the middle. Like, I'm a Christian, but it doesn't really have much of an impact on their daily lives. So that's a big thing I'd focus on. The apologetics issue was something I actually encountered from getting kicked out of Cal. And so you could see, part of God's plan working through that. I got connected up with a friend through swimming in Shelby County, and I invited him to church, was evangelizing to him, but he was an atheist and a very smart, well-spoken atheist, and he started throwing stuff at me, questions, arguments against the faith that I never heard before. I kind of just assumed, because of my upbringing, well, everyone knows this stuff is true. They just choose to live it out or not, to accept it or deny it. But he had good reasons, whether it's based on science, history, logic, for denying it. Right. And so that really had an impact on me. And so I realized I didn't know how to answer most of those questions. And so that led to me focusing on some of that in my...
That's kind of like, well, I mean, at this day and age when ideas are not only like trying to be marginalized, but if your view doesn't agree with somebody's view nowadays, they can be offended, and they can almost tell you nowadays to not share that view. Like it's just the way it is. But it makes you realize now, like, this is too big of a subject to kind of not really dive into. Yeah. Because so many people on the other end of the spectrum are willing to, whether it's a loaded question or an intellectual question, pretty much make all efforts to tell you that you're wrong. And it's sad that the culture in America right now, and at least the American Evangelistic Church, that we don't really make efforts in an apologetic manner to strengthen our faith. And I think that's cool that you're essentially back at Cal trying to do that. But do you think that, I don't know, do you think that it's because everybody's life is somewhat going right at Cal that they're not too passionate about, what they believe in or things like that? Because it almost seems like you getting kicked out of Cal was that kick that you needed to say, like, look, there's more to life than this, but it's not really happening with those kids, right?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. I think people at Cal, you can really lose, in America in general, you can lose a sense of dependence on God, because you're pretty well off. Everything's going well for you. And it's also, though, just a lot of people aren't interested in thinking deeply about things and asking questions or challenging what they've always been told or what they've always thought to be true. That's pretty absent, not just at Cal, but in a lot of places. I found that, so this guy I talked to in high school, he was this atheist that was willing to have these discussions.
Yeah. And
I tried to go out and duplicate some of those conversations. And that was a lot harder to do than I thought, because a lot of people just aren't interested.
Right.
So
do you think, is that one of your bigger challenges as a Bible teacher right now, to try to kind of cultivate like those conversations or that passion like out of your students?
Yeah, it is frustrating, especially dealing with high schoolers. I mean, you know how high school is. For the most part, people don't want to be there. They don't really enjoy being in the classes. They don't feel like they get a ton out of it. And there's some things we can do to change that. But I do have a hard time convincing my students to think deeply about stuff, or to ask questions that may initially freak them out, like, oh man, like, I don't know how to answer these, but then would eventually strengthen their faith. Typically, if I have students that are willing to ask questions, they want quick, easy answers. And that's typically, the questions don't have quick, easy answers. And so it takes thought, it takes time, it takes some wrestling through it. So that can be a frustration teaching at the high school level, where they're not totally engaged, especially like you have been at Cal. You know how you have like your AP, your honors, your college prep. And so your college prep, you're going to have typically kids that don't care as much about academics and AP, and it's different for each level. In Bible classes, they're all mixed together. So I'll have maybe a few kids that are interested, a few that are kind of interested, and then a lot that just don't care. Yeah. And so it's a difficult environment. It
seems almost like, and you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I just remember at Cal, I mean, my classes there were awesome. D-Nick was my apologetics teacher. Dewey was one of my teachers as well. But what still seemed kind of like, you know, getting a good grade in there is all fine and dandy, and learning that's all good and everything. But, you know, your grades and your ACT score and the degree that you go out and get, like, that's the important thing. That's almost what I feel like was pushed a little bit more with Cal. And I don't know, do you feel that way now?
Yeah, we're actually trying to. I don't know what you remember from being in Bible classes at Cal, but the cultural assumption is that Bible class is supposed to be an easy A, right?
Yes.
And so we've been in the process. We have a really good department right now. We've been in the process of reworking the curriculum to change that. Now, what I'll tell students and parents is we're not trying to make it calculus, like it's not supposed to be ridiculously hard, but I'll get a lot of emails from parents or comments from students like, oh, I have a B or I have a C in this class, like, and it's like it's my fault for some reason because they just expect to get an A. So we're trying to make it to where they have to learn things that are a little more difficult. They have to do more critical thinking. They have to put in more effort. It's not just let's sit around and talk about our feelings and Jesus is the answer every time kind of deal. So
that almost seems arrogant that you would assume that it would be an easy A on one of the most important subjects in the world. Well, and even in a secular standpoint, like it's the subject, right?
Well, they come in with the mindset of we've heard this stuff all our lives, so we already know it.
Right.
And it's weird. It's kind of contradictory. I'll get one of two complaints that contradict themselves. One is this idea that this is boring, I already know this is boring, like why don't we talk about something new and interesting? But then when I talk about something new and interesting, then they start freaking out like, oh, this is too hard, or this isn't what we've heard before, like you must be wrong. Like we had an example, we did a unit in a class I taught last semester on the afterlife. Yeah. And we talked about the idea of Sheol and kind of this intermediate state, which is similar to the Catholic idea of purgatory, but not exactly the same. And most of them have never heard of that before. So here you have a new concept that they're learning, having to think through, and their initial reaction for the most part is, well, where is this guy coming from? Like,
Yeah.
Obviously, I would know about this if this was a thing.
Right.
And there is a little bit of an arrogance, like assuming I know everything,
Mm-hmm.
when you could go a lot deeper into it if you chose to.
Yeah. So when you find yourself, diving a little bit deeper into subjects like that, and you think about how many people are struggling with that, even adults maybe, who are like, I don't understand what you're teaching my kids or something like that. Do you ever kind of worry about like our culture or like the people in our country or our family members and friends as far as their faith?
Yeah, I mean, I would worry about the culture of the church
Mm-hmm.
specifically. Just in general, there being a lack of depth.
Mm-hmm.
That's a concern. And part of it is just so many people, even adults, have a shallow understanding of the faith.
Mm-hmm.
They view things like actually studying the Bible and deepening your knowledge and being regularly engaged in ministry. They view that as like that's the job of the pastor or the full-time ministry person.
Yeah.
We don't have to worry about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of it is the fault of the church member who would not seek those things out, but then part of it I think is the fault of the church leaders for not challenging them in those ways.
Yeah. Do you, with that being said, people ask me this sometimes, and it always comes down to salvation being black and white and everything. Like
Mm-hmm.
you're either saved or you're not, but it's like, how do you for sure know?
Yeah.
And I guess my question for you is, what percentage of the American Evangelistic Church and the attendance would you say is actually saved? For me, I'd say it's probably about 10 to 15%.
Yeah, I mean that's a hard question to give an exact answer to because
Right.
At the end of the day you can't judge a person's heart. You can only see their actions,
Mm-hmm.
and you can kind of judge their heart from then. So it's hard to make any kind of absolute statement. But I would say, I mean, I don't know enough about the numbers for American churches across the country, but I would say at Cal, that 10 to 15% number is probably correct as far as the students who are actually, because one of the first things we do, and this was in reworking the curriculum, in the very first unit of the first class freshman year, we now start out defining faith.
Right.
So what is faith? And most people believe that faith is connected with just what you believe, or maybe some kind of decision that you made, right? So
Right.
I believe that obviously God exists. I believe that Jesus died on the cross for my sins. And then usually with that is the decision to go forward at church or at camp. And then usually you're baptized after that. And so the idea is, okay, I've done those things. I believe this stuff. I'm saved. But we talk about faith as a full-bodied faith, and we kind of break it down into components. So we talk about the idea that faith obviously has to do with your mind. You do have to believe certain things about God. Now, do you have to have a specific belief on the age of the earth or if the flood was worldwide or local?
Right.
No. But there are certain things you have to believe, and this comes with apologetics. You should be developing those beliefs and learning more about God. That's very important to your relationship with Him.
Yeah.
But then there's also the heart, right? So what are your desires? And so the Pharisees, Jesus would point out, knew all of this stuff about God,
Right.
but they didn't love Him. They were much more in love with themselves. And then you have your actions, or we call it the hands and feet. So if you love God, you love Jesus, you believe He's your Savior, you believe He's your Lord, that's going to work itself out in the way you live your life on a
Right.
daily basis. And so we try to emphasize that. So faith, it's not like, okay, I've done these things, now I'm saved. And it's not that I have to keep doing certain things in order to be saved and earn my salvation. But if you have a genuine faith, you're going to continue to live it out. Just like if you have a genuine love for your wife or your friends, that'll continue to work itself out, and it'll continue to grow on a daily basis. It doesn't just remain stagnant.
That's a good answer. In all honesty, that's a good answer. Because I mean, like, I don't like to risk offending people like especially in church, on like, and be like, well, what do you think? Do you think I'm saved? And I'm like, dude, I don't know. Like what are you doing with your life? And like, I usually tell people, you know, if your main priority is the pursuit of comfort, then I would argue that you're honestly wasting your life. Like, in a sense where if you think the most important thing after high school, especially if you went to Cal, is for one, graduating, and then going to college, getting a degree, then getting a job in that degree, paying off your student loans, getting a house, getting a car, having a family, and then going to church every Sunday, and that's the extent of it, and your main mission is to secure yourself financially, I would argue that you're wasting your life.
And God's kind of a means to an end in that picture.
Exactly. Yeah. And I tell people, I'm like, at that point, I would have some questions and conversations with yourself about whether or not you are indeed saved. And I tell people, like, you know, I'm not saying that you're not meant for a house and a car. I'm saying that you're not meant to actively search for that over the plan that has been given to you, you know. Yeah. And I know it's hard to find that plan, but like that's what all this is for, you know.
Well, one of the early on in my Christian faith, one of the events that shaped my life in a major way was I went to Passion. Have you been to Passion before?
Everybody except for me has been to Passion.
You're not a Christian, man, if you've not been to Passion.
I know.
So I went to Passion. I've been a few times, but I went the first time my senior year of high school, so in 2011. And John Piper, a guy who started to and is still very influential in my life, he spoke, and he gave a sermon, and there were a lot of points, like most John Piper sermons, but the main point of his sermon is he was asking the question, what is at the bottom of your joy? And the specific question he asked, he says, do you feel more loved by God when he makes much of you, or do you feel more loved by God when he enables you to make much of him? And so what he's pointing out there is, depending on how you answer that question, now both are true,
right?
But there's a ranking. One of those is at the bottom. And so he would go through all these examples and basically ask the question, why? Like, why do you want this? And so kind of the example you were pointing out about comfort or getting a car or a nice house or a nice career or whatever, it's fine to want those things, but if those things are what's at the bottom of your joy, what ultimately is satisfying you, then that's not a good spot to be in. And he kind of made the point, you know, talking about, are you saved or are you not saved? What happens at the beginning of salvation, and it's a journey, is a new birth, right?
Right.
And he says that the new birth, like what happens is all people just naturally, we are at the bottom of our joy. Right? Naturally, we are not seeking God as our ultimate satisfaction. We are at the bottom of our joy. But at the new birth, that's flipped. That's kind of turned on its head, that we now seek out God as our ultimate joy above all of these other things. So,
what do you think it's going to have to take for your students or at least for the American evangelistic culture to kind of catch on to that more? Do you think, because, I mean, you're obviously passionate about it and it's at the center of your life and how you're conducting yourself. Do people need to get kicked out of Cal? Do people need to, you know, suffer like that for a period of time to get a wake-up call? Or do you think, you know, this can be achieved in the classroom?
I think when you go through traumatic experiences, you go through trials, that can definitely be one way that God works through that to wake people up. I mean, it certainly has worked and continues to work that way in my life, but different people learn in different ways. I think it is possible to do that in the classroom. But do I think there's going to be a large number of kids who are born again or kind of get that concept just from sitting in a Bible class? I don't think so. But that's where you also have the really important relational aspect of teaching at Cal or ministering at a church, that you form relationships with people. Most of the most rewarding experiences I have as a teacher is not necessarily in a classroom setting, but when I have a one-on-one conversation with a student outside of the classroom. That's typically where I see things start to click, and it's because I have that relationship. So I don't know. I mean, it's hard to, put together a formula to make any of this stuff happen, but we try to do the best we can.
I feel that. I wanted to ask you a couple of rapid fire questions here soon, but also before that, I wanted to ask you about, so you've been teaching at Cal for how many years?
This is my 3rd year.
Okay. Do you, I guess I don't want to ask you if you plan on doing anything else anytime soon, but is this part of the vision for your life long term, or do you have any dreams or visions that you're wanting to kind of execute in the future?
Well, I feel like the Lord has gifted me in teaching and preaching, and I certainly have a passion for studying God's word or studying issues surrounding God's word, and whether it's teaching on those issues or having conversations, doing ministry. I want to do that in some capacity. I get to do that full time through a church outlet and through the outlet at Cal.
Do you speak at a church?
Yeah, I'm a youth pastor / associate pastor.
Where at?
It's a smaller church in the Fern Creek area. It's called Forest Park Community Church.
Okay, cool.
And so I'm over there, and it's kind of a lot to juggle. And right now I'm definitely in still more of my formative years as far as my career and figuring out what I want to do. But where I'm at right now, I have a lot of great opportunities to gain experience, and I don't have a 10-year plan, or I feel like God is calling me to do this. I'm just trying to serve where I am right now. I would like to, I think, be in a situation where I get to do more studying, potentially even some more writing, stuff like that. So that could either end up being going back and getting my doctorate, studying a certain area in a much deeper fashion, or it could look like being full-time at a church or continuing to be at Cal for a while. I'm not sure. Coming out of a situation where I had a lot of jobs, and I'm trying to say no to things and simplify things a little bit. But.
Okay, cool. Oh man, what was the question I was going to ask? It totally just left my mind.
It happens.
Oh gosh, what was it? It had to do with the church. Oh, do you before Joey Eaton moved to St. Augustine, did you ever hang out with him still? Because he pastored over at Garfield Avenue Baptist Church.
Yeah, he was a teacher there for a couple of years while I was there, but I didn't know him super well. Dewey, who's still I teach next in the room next to him, and I'm good friends with him. He knows him pretty well, but I don't know him that well.
Okay, cool. Oh, and here's the question I was going to ask you. All right, cool. So you made a major life turnaround in a sense, kind of right after you got kicked out of Cal. When you went to Collins, you were like, okay, I need to evaluate things. But here you are now, what, 9 years later, 8 years later?
Yeah, it's flown by. Yeah, I just turned 26, so this is 8 to 9 years later.
So what have you learned now that you just, I guess, you didn't know at the beginning of that? Has there been anything shown to you in your journey, even just recently, that you're like, man, I thought I knew what I was doing, but I had no idea what I was doing?
From when I first became a Christian, in that first year? Well, a big thing was the apologetics issue. So I've been introduced to this whole world of, there's so many different people around the world with so many different belief systems, so many different answers to the big questions of life. And so I've been introduced to a lot of that, and have had to try to figure out how to deal with that and answer those questions.
Do people kind of challenge you even in the classroom?
Sometimes. It depends on the student, or it depends on the class, but I've had some challenges. A lot of the challenges just come from dealing with the subject matter that I'm dealing with, right? So just a lot of issues that I have to think through. And when I first became a Christian and I had that encounter with some atheists that were asking tough questions, experienced a lot of doubt. And so that's still something that I experience on a regular basis, even today. Because you grow up being told that certain things are true, or this is the way that it is, and you just kind of assume that it's all true. But then you hear all these different perspectives, and it's difficult to evaluate all of that.
Do you think apologetics is neglected as far as, you know, our upbringing in our Christian faith?
Yeah. I mean, it's been neglected. It's coming on a little bit more in the church because the need has become more obvious. So obviously secularism, atheism is growing in our country. And so the church is getting engaged in apologetics as a response to that. And so you have a ton of resources, books, websites, podcasts that are dedicated to all that stuff. There's classes in the church. It's touched on, and your regular Sunday services.
It still seems, though, almost that the apologetics pathway and then the mainstream Christian church pathway are still kind of separate for the most part. And I'm not making any complaints about, like, you know, what I see on church on Sundays. Like, I think I see a lot of great messages and stuff like that, but it's almost as if more often than not, I kind of see sermons that cater just a little bit more to our narcissism, instead of saying, like, look, this is what it is, right? And here's why. And, like, we should be inspired by this and feel good about this. But it's like, listen, there is a call to a certain discipline and responsibility with this sort of thing, and we have to be careful not to get watered down just for the sake of our feelings or how we're feeling at the time.
Well, we have a difficult situation in modern churches, especially bigger churches, because the regular Sunday church service or Saturday becomes one of the biggest outlets for evangelism, because you have so many non-Christians, whether they identify themselves or they in reality are non-Christians, at the service. And so it's hard to go very deep into things when that's a major part of your audience. And so I think you see more effectively people learning apologetics in classes and kind of their own research, or maybe in groups when they're getting together with people, or at school.
Yeah.
That's where you see that be more effective. Because some of it, one of the biggest things that I've had to learn, even through going to college, I'm dealing with all these questions. I'm interested in all these questions. And so I assume, there's going to be all these, like, quick, perfect, super interesting answers, when a lot of it's not that way. Like, if you're going to ask a question that has to do with, like, the history, the background behind the Old Testament, you're going to have to get into ancient Near Eastern cultural studies. And this is not, you know, like a Netflix documentary that is super interesting and super entertaining. There's a lot of grunt work involved in it.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to do a lot of that in your normal Sunday service, if you know what I mean.
Is there been anything like that you learned at seminary that you did not like to hear? Like, not like, oh, this is boring, but it's like, I don't know if I like the sound of that. Or if, like, not even that you didn't agree, but you're like, man, I hate that that's a thing almost.
I definitely found with some of my questions, specifically about the Bible, the answers weren't as clear as I would like. So, for example, there's a question surrounding the Bible as far as which books belong in the Bible, right? If you're friends with any Catholic people, you'll notice that we don't have the same books in the Bible. We have most of the same books in the Bible.
What do they have? They have the Maccabees.
The Apocrypha, which includes Maccabees, Wisdom of Solomon, Ecclesiasticus. There's several different
Do they
books.
have the Book of Enoch in there?
I think Enoch is one that's in there, yeah.
I want to ask you about your opinion on that book in a minute, but
okay.
You can continue.
I don't know how much I know about the Book of Enoch, but there's a ton of books that were written around that time, or you could debate, do they belong in the Bible? And so I'm looking for a pretty clear, like, obvious answer. Oh, this is why we have the books that we have. And it wasn't really that way.
Okay.
So we have some criteria that we would use to try to determine, if these books belong in the Bible. But it ends up making sense. Like if you think about when these books were written, the people that wrote these books, the early church that was using these books, they weren't thinking about like, oh, in 1500 years they're going to be having a debate over which books belong in the Bible. They were just doing ministry. They were trying honestly not to be persecuted and imprisoned and put to death. And so it wasn't until later on when you had these different books that claimed to be gospels about Jesus that they had to evaluate it. So the principle we would use, think about Yeezys. So you have genuine Yeezys and you have fake Yeezys, right?
Yeah.
So no one comes out and says, all right, so here are the Yeezys, and initially when they put them out, this is how you know that you have a real Yeezy and a fake Yeezy. Until the fake Yeezys come around,
right?
That's when you start saying, oh, well, we have to provide some test or give some criteria to show people these are the real ones. You can distinguish them between the fake ones. And so that's kind of like what we have for the Bible. But that was much more complicated than initially I was hoping it would be, especially as a young seminary student.
Okay. Now, with the start of, canonizing the Bible and everything and all the, persecution that was at the beginning of the start of the first Christian church, that's not really something that, at least to that extent, that we go through here in America. But do you think that reality could change within our lifetime?
Not on the scale that the early church had it, but it can change a little bit. Obviously you see it with people are so bad at engaging others in political and religious discussions in our country, right? It becomes much less about, hey, let's talk this out. Let's see where the other person is coming from. Let's get to the truth. It just becomes more of like a gotcha conversation.
But don't you feel like with that happening that it's almost such a childish approach, that with a childish behavior comes childish actions? And it like with somebody doing a gotcha argument or getting offended so easily by that opposing idea that people are going to throw fits in a way that's actually gonna, kind of try to marginalize that.
Well, I think you see the childish behavior on both sides, right? There are a lot of Christians that the minute that, especially if it's an issue that is kind of in both realms of politics and religion,
I agree.
They're not going to be very reasonable in discussing it with people. But you do have obviously the potential dangers of the government kind of overstepping its bounds, where people nowadays aren't just wanting freedom of religion, but they're also wanting freedom from religion. And so how far do we go with that? I mean, they just had the bill in Kentucky yesterday that passed to keep "In God We Trust" in our schools.
There we go.
Obviously, there's a lot of people that aren't a big fan of that. If they took that out, would I think that's a huge deal? Not really. I mean, because in the end,
I think it'd be like, it's not anything I'd freak out over, but I'd be like, oh, this is a step in a certain direction.
The problem you get, the only potential danger and persecution I could think of happening, and this is still nowhere close to the scale the early church experienced. So you have like your situation with the bakery that was sued over not making a cake for their wedding. What if, as a pastor, I have someone come to me, in what context would they come to me? I don't know. And they say, hey, we are gay and we want to get married and we want you to officiate our wedding. Yeah. If we come to a spot where I can't say no, right, or the situation is the government tells me either you do it or you lose your ordination, that could be a big issue, right? I don't know if we're going to get there. There's been some worries about that, but...
Well, for me, that seems a little bit closer than you might think, because, I don't know, I feel like with, what's going on in politics nowadays and what's like... I guess just what's so emotionally charged on both ends is that, we're trying so hard to to keep things one way, and there's such an outrage on not moving it the other way that if somebody actually does get their way, that it might be taken too far in a certain direction. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it's like when Trump's, if he gets a second term or not, when he's done being president, like what's going to happen after that? You know?
They'll try to go all the way to the other end as a reaction.
Because it'll be a position that is up for grabs essentially, and whoever gets that position, it's going to be like, hey, we're going to just go all the way now. It's like we were just wanting to have these things, but now it's like we're wanting to have like the whole freaking pie. Yeah. And not only are we taking In God We Trust out off the dollar bill, but we're taking Bibles out of schools, and we're taking, like, if you're an ordained minister and you don't marry a gay couple, like you're going to be fined big time.
Right.
But for discrimination.
Yeah, that could be a worry of persecution. I mean, the commonality between that and the early church is that ultimately the Roman government was opposed to the early church and many of their core values and their faith. And our government is definitely trending in that direction. But obviously it's not a good thing if that happens. But in the end, we still follow Christ, and we're still loyal to Christ. And that's ultimately all that's going to matter.
But now, like, when we bring that concept up, then that really makes you think about the substance of the students in the classroom or the people of the American Evangelistic Church. What happens when it hits the fan like that? Who's gonna stay strong with it, and who's gonna fall off and fade away? And that's where, you know, when we talk about apologetics and we talk about, you know, like diving deeper and not just having the easy Bible answers and the easy A, that like, if people actually do understand, like, hey, look, you know, this is why we're teaching it. This is why we're kind of being as intense as we are about, you know, these certain subjects, because when you are put to the test and maybe somebody's going to tell you that you have to say no, you're going to have to figure out why you're saying yes.
Yeah, I mean, you got to be prepared with answers, and we've already seen many examples of prominent Christians who don't have good answers, kind of making a fool of themselves and giving answers that are not good and are embarrassing. So, I mean, that will show a need for apologetics. But as far as political issues, I need to be more into politics than I am, but I certainly am not a political expert. I don't know.
I try not to dive into it too heavy, because at the same time, I can't recite to you any particular legislation that goes on, right? I just know, you know, what is typically said over the media and what's conflated, or like the polarizing issues that are happening. And then I'm like, listen, you know, maybe we all need to figure out how to take a step back and how to dissect these things one by one. And that's all I can really say. But
I think, though, we definitely come out of a culture, I don't know about with your family, but at Cal and at Southeast, it's very Republican.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's kind of, everyone kind of leans that direction. That's been a major influence, and it can sometimes be in an unhelpful way. Like I've heard students say in random conversations, like, do they allow Democrats to teach at Cal? Like, can you be a Democrat and teach at Cal? And it's like,
well, you know, Mr. Ashcraft's a Democrat. Yeah, he's liberal.
He's pretty openly a Democrat, and there are others as well. And so I don't. It can be. You definitely see, and we've talked about this in class recently, Christians that are more loyal to the Republican Party than they are to Christ, and that's an issue that I'm certainly concerned with.
I think nowadays people are letting politics dictate their reality instead of letting reality dictate their politics. Because I mean, in church, you know, like Kyle Idleman's going to say all day, like, listen, Jesus is above the Democratic and Republican Party. Like, this is all nonsense. Like, and for me to bring my political views over my faith into what I tell people, that's wrong. Like, it's good to keep track of what's going on in your country and everything like that, and to kind of have a certain position, like with respect to the other position. But I think what I see nowadays is it is like, oh, you're a Republican, then you're a Christian, or it's like, oh, if you're a Christian, then you must be a Republican,
Right.
And it's like, no, that's not true at all, but what I'm also seeing too is, even though there is a major conservative population in the church, I'm also seeing to where, people are still kind of afraid to say that out loud to themselves. Like, if I'm like, oh, well, I mean, like, I would never really ask this, but it's like, if I ask somebody, did you vote for Trump or not? They wouldn't tell me.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the same way that they go about talking about Jesus or their faith, like in whatever place that they go, it's like nobody's going to bring that up on their own unless you ask them about it. And that's where I'm like, okay, are we gonna kind of be bold in what we stand for with respect to other people, or are we gonna kind of be wishy-washy and get washed away?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big issues with religion and with politics is people need to learn how to engage better with each other.
And that's what you're doing.
And that's where you're going to get a lot with evangelism, and we need to do a better job as a church and a school practically teaching people this. You're not going to really have a situation, unless you're on certain parts of the mission field in other countries, where you stand up and you're like preaching a sermon and you're telling someone about the gospel for the same time. You have to have a conversation with someone, and that needs to start with you developing a loving relationship with them and really figure out where they're coming from. Show them that you hear them, you actually understand them, but because you care about them, this is something you want to discuss, and you want to talk through it with them. And I don't think the average Christian is very good at doing that, and they're not even maybe necessarily looking for those conversations, certainly not with high schoolers.
Yeah. I'm right there with you. Do you Gosh, I get so deep into what you're saying that I forget my next question.
You were going to do rapid fire questions.
Yeah, that's right. But there was another question I was going to ask, and it made me think of that as you were talking, but then it literally just left my mind. Gosh, I'm so ADD. Oh, well, let's go ahead and get in the rapid fire questions. Okay. If I think of it, then I'll do that. All right, so what is your favorite book?
Ooh, my favorite book. I've been reading a lot of John Walton recently.
Who's that?
He's a professor at Wheaton College in Chicago.
Yeah.
And he specializes in ancient Near Eastern studies and languages, so he can sit down with like a Sumerian or Akkadian and read that, like we're talking before Hebrew. So I'm not necessarily into that stuff, but he's really influenced me recently in the area of biblical interpretation. Okay. So he has a whole series, and I don't know if I agree with him on everything. I'm still in the process of taking it all in. Yeah. But he has a series called the Lost World series, and they're pretty readable. They're definitely scholarly, but they're pretty readable. He has one on Genesis 1.
Can you get them on tape?
On tape? I don't know. I'm not a book on tape guy, so I have no idea.
I'm a book on tape guy, like all day long.
I have trouble even just reading it right in front of me, like going down an entire page and not taking any of it in. So I certainly have to look at it. But it's on Genesis 1, Adam and Eve. I just finished one today on the flood.
Okay. That's honestly, that's my favorite book of the Bible, to be honest. Like
Genesis.
It's so loaded.
Yeah.
With a lot of stuff, but that is cool. And his name is John Walton.
John Walton. So we got to go to a conference that he was at recently and eat lunch with him. So that was cool.
Holy crap.
I don't do a lot of.
Is he in Kentucky?
No, it was in Chicago.
Oh, it was. Okay.
We went up there as a department. I don't do a lot of novel reading. I need to get more into that. I have trouble, especially around March. A lot of my free time will be watching basketball, especially as the tournament comes around, as a UK fan and everything. So nice. Got to balance that out.
I just remembered the question I was going to ask you earlier. So with you having gone to seminary, okay, and then getting into teaching Bible at Cal, with the rate of people who go into evangelism or like mission work Do you think that the people that are going nowadays, for the majority, are actually ready to do that? Now that you have been to seminary, where you are in the 100th percentile of being knowledgeable about the Bible?
I think there are a lot of people coming out of seminary that are doing that. I mean, I'm only really connected to the Southern Baptist world, where you have like the International Mission Board or North American Mission Board. North American Mission Board is placing a large emphasis on church planting in big cities right now, and so you're seeing some good things happen there. And I think they're doing a great job of preparing people. I have a friend that I used to go to church with who's in Denver right now, planning a church. I don't know if you remember Sarah Reese. She was in my grade.
Yeah, I ran track with her.
Her husband is one of the pastors at that church, so they moved out there.
Yeah, she's cool.
So you see a lot of that, and you see a lot of international mission work. I don't know a lot, to be honest, about that type of mission work, though. I've never been on an international mission trip. I've been mainly focused on ministry in Louisville. That's kind of what I felt called to.
Well, so I asked that because I went on a mission trip to Catania, Sicily, almost 2 years ago now, but I was there all summer. And I mean, outside of my high school education at Cal, which was really good and helped me be knowledgeable and whatnot, I remember being out there and thinking to myself, like, good Lord, like, I know that I'm doing what I've been asked to do, and it's like a matter of the heart, but like, golly, I don't know if I'm ready.
Yeah.
And it was like not like I don't know if I want to do this. It's like, no, I definitely want to do it, but it's like, I don't know if I'm like prepared the way I should be. And I don't know if there's like if that's just what a lot of people are doing.
Well, I think you probably have a lot of people that aren't having those conversations, aren't doing that work just where they are at home, and then you travel a couple thousand miles and you're trying to do it there. That's not going to translate very well, although the way you would go about things might be different. But I think that definitely feeds into it.
I think to myself sometimes, because more often than not, like, whenever I hear about mission trips, I hear about the positives all the time, but I also hear about the negatives. And a lot of the negatives to me are hearing about silly arguments happening over how somebody is like conducting themselves in a way where it's like it's just conflicting personality issues. But then also I hear stories about like guys getting sent home because they can't handle themselves around girls and being in a new place like that.
Oh, like with high schoolers?
Yeah, with high schoolers. Yeah. Or even when I was in Catania, Sicily, there was another church group that was out there. It was a different church. This guy was my age, though, and he couldn't handle himself.
Yeah.
He was my age, and he kept, like, confessing his love for this girl and everything, and he's like, I need to be with you. And I'm like, this is not, where are we? This is not the place for that. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, we're sending people, like, tons of kids out regularly like this, and it's like you have to be prepared in a major way to be a deacon or an elder at a church. Like, you have to have some credentials. On a serious note, like at least at Southeast, you have to be A1 to be an elder there. And I'm like, okay, so if they're just helping with like the administration or whatever they're doing at church, why are we sending kids to work with third world country situations? Like, it's like, wait, are we going to plant a church out there? Because we should probably have some elders going. And it's just a small tangent that I have right now, and it's kind of thrown me into some confusion because there are a lot of organizations that do a lot of good with youth going on mission trips, but I'm like, I just wonder if when we neglect diving in deeper to our faith for the sake of like apologetics and whatnot, if we are spreading ourselves too thin, by doing these things, letting ourselves get watered down or lukewarm, and then kids just quit.
Yeah, I mean, it can seem pretty haphazard at sometimes.
That's just a rant of mine. But yeah, I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. But but yeah, back to the rapid fire questions then.
Okay.
So we got, what was his name again?
John Walton.
John Walton. I'm going to keep that in mind because I do want to read about that. What is your favorite movie or top 3 movies?
Ooh, me and my wife have just been on a little stint of watching these Oscar movies. So we watched Bohemian Rhapsody last night and A Star Is Born.
What'd you think of that?
I thought it was good. It was cool to kind of go back and relive some of the Queen songs and kind of see that history. I thought that the guy that played him did an excellent job. Definitely should have won.
They have a lot more
actor.
hits than I knew about.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy how many songs they had. Songs that were their songs I didn't even know were their songs. And
that I Want It All song. Yeah, I didn't know that was a Queen song. And then Radio Gaga.
I didn't know that they had a song that was literally called "I'm in Love with My Car." So
yeah, me too. Yeah.
So they were huge. And then A Star Is Born. It was good. It was sad, but it was very well done.
I went and saw that with my family, and all the girls, I mean, like almost my whole family went and saw it together, right? All the girls in my family were crying, and then all of the guys in my family were like, well, that was a good nap, right? But I watched it intently, and I thought it was amazing, but it was like, I don't know. I think it was either like a tearjerker for girls, or like guys are like, oh, I'm not into this, but.
Yeah, my wife definitely cried. It was good. It was sad. It's not one that makes you feel all happy after you finish watching it. But
my mom keeps watching it, and she meant to rent it on our DirecTV, but she just ended up buying it.
I think it's probably a one-time watch. Maybe watch it again down the road.
Do you think that there's something going on with Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga?
Oh, I mean, most people would assume so after the live performance. You don't ever really know, but
that was wild.
It was wild. The way they're looking at each other, that would be so difficult.
Because Bradley Cooper's married.
I think he's just dating someone.
Oh well, whatever.
I'm not sure. I'm not up on all my Bradley Cooper facts, but that would be so difficult to be married to someone who does, to be an actor
and to watch them have that chemistry with somebody on stage.
Yeah, or married to someone that's in a band with someone else that they could possibly be romantically interested in, especially if they're singing love songs. That would be difficult.
Yeah. Jeez. Any other movies?
I mean, I really like Lord of the Rings. I went back and watched those again. But with most of my free time now, I watch sports and kind of stay up on that.
Cool. So. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received? It could be multiple pieces. Advice.
Well, I got a really good piece of advice from a friend when I was starting to seriously get into dating that really helped me, I think, in my dating relationship with my wife. But he basically said, kind of pointing out a big mistake that we make even in the Christian culture. He said, if you treat your dating relationship prematurely like a marriage, then your breakup is going to end up being like a divorce. So it's going to end up resembling a lot of the effects of a divorce. And so that was something I really took to heart. I was in a relationship that it wasn't even that long and wasn't super serious, relatively speaking. But I definitely was way more torn up about it than I should have been. And it was because I was way too into it way too early. Yeah. And so that really helped me as I got to reflect on that. And
I know there's not a science to it, but there's definitely like levels of opening your heart to somebody that we definitely don't take time to analyze.
Yeah, when you just jump right into, before you're even dating someone, you're in this like talking stage where you're just texting them every minute of the day, you're constantly calling them, hanging out with them every week. You're beginning to hang out and talk to that person more than most married people would hang out or talk with each other. And in some levels, that's not healthy. Yeah. Especially when you jump into stuff physically way too early.
Do you think our generation kind of turns dating into an audition?
Well, I mean, certainly on The Bachelor they do, but
which is insane to me that I will hear if I hear the complaints that I hear on a daily basis about how all men are trash, or like all of the stuff that I just hear, and then I see you on Snapchat getting glasses of wine with your girlfriends to watch a guy cheat on girls, like for a television show, that throws me into such a loop, like into such an aggravated loop. I don't know what to do with myself.
Yeah, the Bachelor's definitely a twisted situation.
That's one of the most backwards things I've ever seen.
It's not real life though. So like, I don't think in real life it's necessarily seen as an audition. I mean, my approach to dating was definitely, I'm the kind of guy that tries to step back and look for as many clues as possible, and to try to look for any evidence before I make rash decisions.
Yeah.
I think a lot of relationships start out on the friend level and then kind of gradually progress from there, but I don't know. That's been my experience.
Cool. How long have you been married?
It'll be 5 years in June.
Nice.
5 years in June. We're taking off for Italy at the end of the summer.
What part of Italy?
We're going to go start towards the south in Naples, and then kind of go up. So we'll go to Rome, into Florence, Tuscany area, then go to Cinque Terre, I think is how you say that, and then end up in Venice.
Nice. That's awesome.
Fun.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So if you could give the audience any piece of advice, or you could tell them anything about yourself and who you are, what would you want them to know?
So I guess primarily what is your audience, or who?
My grandmother.
Your grandmother? Okay.
She's my biggest fan. But seriously, it's like, it really is just like all kinds of people. Do you know who Stu Perry is? Do you remember Stu Perry?
Yeah, he's been to speak at chapel.
Mm-hmm. So I had him on my podcast lately because not only does, he's a Christian and everything, but like he's openly gay now, and he's a wrestler. So he's got a pretty, just colorful lifestyle.
Right.
So I had him on to talk about that. And I mean, I'm getting people of just all different walks of life who will hear my podcast come up to me and be like, okay, look, I listened to that one and I got some questions for you. Or like, that was astounding to hear, or they'll have certain views on it. So the audience is diverse. So
I guess I would say, like, the kind of conversation that we're having right now, or the kind of conversations people like to listen to on podcasts, presumably the people that are listening to this listen to podcasts.
Right.
I think that it's very important that we have these conversations just in normal life, that we have them with friends, with people maybe we don't even know that well, and not just because people are going to listen to them or because it's our job or our hobby, but it would be something that we would do regularly, because you learn a lot in having those conversations. You learn a lot in listening to those conversations.
Agreed.
I think that's something very, very important to do, and listening to podcasts can cultivate that desire.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really good, but just having these conversations and being able and being willing to listen to where other people are coming from and to talk out issues with them.
Agreed. Nice. Cool. So what is your favorite music, your favorite artist, and favorite songs?
Music, I'm all over the place, man.
Yeah.
I don't listen to much rap anymore just because
it's just different.
Yeah.
It's just different now.
If they're talented, I can't get on board with a lot of the messages. Unfortunately, a lot of the quote-unquote Christian rappers are not super talented comparatively.
I mean, it's just I don't know. Yeah.
I'm unashamedly a boy band person. So I actually, my favorite artists, just in general, I can have different people that I'm into at different times, but the one constant in my life is Justin Timberlake, for sure.
I feel that.
I love just about anything that he puts out.
He's consistent.
Yeah.
He's good.
And I'm not saying our worldviews necessarily line up, but I definitely, I like him a lot.
I like the song Say Something with him and Chris Stapleton.
Yeah, well, now that you mentioned that, I've definitely recently gotten into that genre of country, so kind of the older style bluegrassy type country. Nice. From him to If you know who Sturgill Simpson is,
My
or
man.
Tyler
Yes.
Childers, any of those guys.
Yeah, so
there's a guy, I don't know how new he is, but there's a guy named Coulter Wall that's from Canada.
I'll
He
have to check
sounds
him
the
out.
closest to Johnny Cash that I've ever heard.
Seriously. Okay.
But he's like our age, and he sounds like he's Johnny Cash.
I'll have to check him
he's
out.
really good.
Cool. But yeah, no, I saw Chris Stapleton at the Great Lawn down on the river, right?
Yeah.
And then I saw Sturgill Simpson in the Ogden Theater in Denver, Colorado.
Oh, nice.
And so the Ogden Theater is a lot like the Palace in Louisville downtown, right? But it's a little bit more enclosed. But how many years ago? That was probably 3 years ago. But
yeah, he's a harder ticket now, huh?
Yeah, he
All
was a
those
lot
guys.
harder, but he was still really good then. But I got straight up hotboxed in that theater.
No.
I'm not kidding.
I bet.
It was wild, but it was so much fun. But yeah, man, that's some of my favorite artists too. But so yeah, Justin Timberlake, Chris Stapleton, Sturgill Simpson. Anybody else?
Not that I could throw out there. I mean, it kind of just depends on the day.
Cool.
But that's what I've been listening to now. Either some pop or country, but I don't like it when they get mixed together. That's for sure.
Agreed. Last question: do you have any favorite pieces of scripture that you live by?
Ooh. I've been doing the scripture in a year reading plan, and that's been good, but also difficult, right? Because you're flying through stuff, and then you also have to read every part of scripture, and when you do that, you find out that a lot of it's not super interesting.
Yeah.
When you're reading 9 chapters of genealogies and chronicles, or you're reading Leviticus, or you're reading the same stuff over and over again in the prophets, and most of it's negative. But I mean, the big one that would come to mind is Romans 8, just as a chapter.
You like 28
as a
through 30? Because that's some of my favorite.
Yeah, I mean, I like the whole chapter. There's a
Yeah.
lot in there, but that's just a great picture of the gospel. So I really enjoy that. I like a lot of Paul's letters, like Ephesians 1 through 2 has been very impactful in my life. Philippians 1, the whole idea of to live as Christ, to die as gain, but then the verses, in the context of that, right before and after.
Nice.
Those are some of my favorite, some of the most
Cool.
influential.
Well, Mr. Troutman, thank you for being on the podcast. Man. I feel like I've learned a lot today, and I know the audience will learn a lot. But yeah, no, I wish you the best and everything on your endeavors and all that. And
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, thank you for listening. I hope you all learned a lot today. See you next time. Have a good one.